Good evening, I'm Jill Newbronner. Here are tonight's top stories from East Asia. A call for orderly government and heightened security from South Korea's third acting president in 5 months. Education Minister Lee Ji-ho stepping in to fill a temporary vacuum in leadership. Live fire drills near the inter-Korean border as the government in Seoul sharpens readiness after failures to intercept North Korean drones, including one that breached airspace over the capital. China considering an offer from Washington to talk tariffs in a possible easing of trade tensions following positive signs on talks with Japan and South Korea. But the trade war spelling bad news for factories in East Asia, manufacturing output slumping in Taiwan and South Korea as orders shrink amid global economic uncertainty. Ahead on East Asia tonight, a spread of hawker food from Singapore in South Korea. Culinary delights of cultural significance as both countries mark 50 years of diplomatic relations. And a unique and immersive high school experience, even for the seasoned traveler in Japan. More twists and turns in South Korean politics. The country's former acting president, Han Duck-soo, has declared he will contest next month's presidential election. Mr. Han announced his candidacy in a press conference this morning, a day after stepping down as interim leader.
수많은 통상 협상을 성공적으로 이끌어왔습니다. 이 일을 가장 오래 해온 사람이고 가장 잘할 사람이라고 자신합니다. 미국 정부는 물론 각계 전문가들과 활발히 소통하고 있습니다. 이번 통상 현안도 반드시 풀어내 보이겠습니다.
Mr. Han's resignation would have meant that the acting president role would have gone to Finance Minister Chae Sang-mok by law. But he too abruptly resigned after Parliament restarted impeachment proceedings against him for decisions he took when he last held the position. Education Minister Lee Ji-ho has taken over as acting president, the third in 5 months since the impeached former president Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law decree. He has vowed to ensure next month's election will be fair and orderly, while calling for the nation's military readiness to be elevated to the highest level. South Koreans are keeping a close eye to see who could become the next president. Mr. Han was prime minister under both liberal and conservative presidents. He served as ambassador to the U.S. and has been a favorite among conservatives to challenge Lee Jae-myung, the presidential candidate of the Liberal Democratic Party. The former opposition chief is seen as front-runner in the race, but his path to the presidency has been hit by a court overturning a ruling that had cleared him of violating election law. He will be retried over the same charges on the 15th of May, which is days after the presidential candidate registration deadline. A lot to unpack. So for that, we're joined by CNA's Im Young-suk. First of all, Young-suk, what are former acting president Han Duck-soo's chances in the presidential race?
Well, Jill, it's really hard to tell. There's still about 1 month to go. And so it really depends on whether Han Duck-soo will be able to convince voters that he is the right choice for South Korea. As to how he will do compared to the other frontrunner, the Lee Jae-myung, several different polls show different results, but most of them do show Lee Jae-myung way up in front with a majority, and Han Duck-soo with some showing less than 20%, some with about 25% too. But these are opinion polls that were carried out before Han Duck-soo declared that he would run for president. Now, we went out to the streets of Seoul today to talk to some of the people out there, and many of them didn't like the idea of Han Duck-soo resigning to run as president, mainly because they felt that he should have stayed on as acting president to keep the country running until the new president is in power. But let me share with you what some of them said.
대행들이 국가 경제를 잘 유지해주고 미국과의 관계를 잘 유지를 해야 되는데 이런 걸 하고 있었던 한덕수 총리와 최상목 대행이 갑자기 사표를 내고 그만두는 것은 한국 경제에 많은 어려움이 있을 거고 앞으로 한 달 정도 남은 대선까지 많은 한국의 혼란과 어려움이 있을 것으로 예상이 됩니다.
정치 국회의원만 하고 이제 뭐 도지사 정도 했던 사람들은 나라를 다스려봤기 때문에 알아요. 그 지역을 다스려봤기 때문에 아는데 그래도 이 한덕수는 행정 쪽을 갖다가 다 담당했던 사람이니까 가능하지 않을까 하는 생각은 합니다.
이 상황을 타개하기 위해서 정치권에서 많은 노력을 해야 한다고 생각을 합니다. 그러기 위해서는 여당에서나 야당에서나 그렇게 정쟁으로만 일관할 게 아니라 서로 타협과 협력의 정치를 해야 하지 않을까 고민합니다.
Now, Han Duck-soo is in the presidential race, but he doesn't belong to any political party. And so many experts here think that very soon he'll be joining forces with the ruling party, which has yet to announce its presidential candidate. Now, after the ruling party carried out several rounds of debate, the final two candidates for the ruling party out of the 11 are former ruling party leader Han Dong-hoon and former labor minister Kim Moon-soo. Now, the ruling party is scheduled to hold a national convention on Saturday to declare the winner and the ruling party's presidential candidate. So it is very likely that after Saturday, Han Duck-soo will start talks with the presidential candidate and he could emerge as the party's presidential candidate. Now, when there were rumors going around that he was, he could run, the two candidates for the ruling party, Han Dong-hoon and Kim Moon-soo, had hinted that they could unite and join forces to win against Lee Jae-myung. Now, the last day to register as presidential candidates is May 11th. So there's still time, there's a bit of time left, not too much, but many experts saying that it is very possible that he will be able to form some kind of a united party and run as the ruling party's presidential candidate against Lee Jae-myung.
You mentioned former opposition leader Lee Jae-myung is a formidable force, but might the latest Supreme Court ruling throw a spanner in the works?
Well, yes, in a way, Lee Jae-myung was all set to become the next president of South Korea as the candidate for the ruling party. But, he was all set to become the next president. But, we now have Han Duck-soo, who has said that he was going to run. But most important is the ruling by the Supreme Court. And that's because, the lower court had found him guilty of violating election laws when he was running as president in the 2022 presidential election against Yoon Suk-yeol. It handed down a suspended one-year prison term, which would not allow Lee Jae-myung to run as president for 5 years and take away his seat in parliament. But later, we had the high court saying that he was not guilty. And so Lee Jae-myung thought that his legal troubles were all over until yesterday when the Supreme Court overturned that, saying that Lee Jae-myung was guilty of making false claims. And it sent back this case to the High Court, which will now hold its first trial on the 15th. So things are really moving faster in South Korea, and it's really hard to tell how long the trials will last and when the verdict will be out. But if it is out before the June 3rd presidential election, and if the High Court finds him guilty, then Lee Jae-myung will be out of the presidential race. However, if he is not found guilty and the prosecution side appeals, the case goes back to the Supreme Court once again. And so, with little time left, it's hard to say whether the Supreme Court will be able to make a ruling before the presidential election day, though many experts saying that would be very unlikely. And so, Jill, with so much confusion surrounding Lee's legal case and only 1 month left before this presidential election, there are just so many different scenarios that can happen between now and then.
And that is an understatement, but thank you for helping us figure it all out. CNA's Im Young-suk, live from Seoul. Well, China says the U.S. has taken the initiative in trade negotiations, and it is currently evaluating an offer for tariff talks. China's Commerce Ministry said Washington had approached Beijing on many occasions through relevant parties, expressing interest in dialogue. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also says talks with Beijing will be coming up soon, but he stressed that the U.S. must consider how much it should buy from China. Beijing earlier denied repeatedly that any such negotiations were taking place and insists that the talks would only happen if the U.S. shows sincerity. The retaliatory tariff measures have seen U.S. duties rise to as high as 145% on Chinese imports, with Beijing hitting back with 125% tariffs on American goods. Meanwhile, Tokyo's envoy for the tariff talks with the U.S., Ryose Akazawa, says the second round of negotiations has been, quote, frank and constructive. This latest round of discussions reportedly revolved around how Tokyo can expand trade, non-tariff measures, and economic and security cooperation with Washington. Japan still faces a 10% baseline levy, steeper levies on cars, steel, and aluminium worth 24%. Mr. Akazawa says any tariff relief deal will be in the form of a package. A third round of talks will take place later this month. Now, there are some hints of possible negotiations between the U.S. and China. Question is, what Asian countries can bring to the negotiating table? Well, Roland joins me now to talk about how much is about real policy and how much is just posturing, Roland. So let's start with a regional question. Can Asian countries, ex-China, actually play a meaningful role in helping resolve the tariff standoff?
Jill, they can, and some of them already have. I mean, Southeast Asian economies like Vietnam, Malaysia are already positioning themselves as an alternative manufacturing hub to China. And for Trump, that's politically useful because he then can go back to his electorate and say that there's been decoupling from China while still keeping the supply chains intact. So it's going to be a face-saving move for Trump if he makes bilateral deals with these economies. And then it's going to say that he's been tough on China, and he still managed to secure goods for the Americans.
So Beijing's tone seems to be shifting somewhat. I don't know if you can call it warming, but state media is saying that there's no harm in talks. But official channels are still demanding that the U.S. be the first to drop their tariffs. So read between the lines for us.
Yes, it's deliberate. I mean, China wants to appear to be open to dialogue, but at the same time not seem weak. And that's to their own audience, especially at home. So they're using social media platforms from state media firms to actually peddle a softer approach towards talks, while at the same time officially the hardline stance remains that they will not back down from China. So it's China saying that, look, we're not being unreasonable, we are not the obstacle here, but on the other side of it, it also showing to their wider audience that, they're not going to back down from the U.S.
Yeah, a lot of posturing going on there. But Trump saying the talks are happening. Again, officials in both countries denying that, keeping cards close to their chest. I get that, though. It's a bit of a show, isn't it?
It is a bit of a show. And Trump is also playing to his own base, especially with the midterm elections coming up next year. So Trump wants to look strong, but at the same time, he also needs to do a deal. Remember, U.S. retailers have reminded him that their shelves will be empty after the summer if deals don't get down. So the pressures, the economic pressures on both these countries are very real. So for him, it's a messaging to his voters. And the talks, I have to say, will likely happen. This is after both sides have protected themselves to be in a position of strength, as it were. It's going to be a case of who's going to approach the other side first, who's coming from a stronger position. So all this is just posturing at this point in time. But the economic pressures on both economies, that's very real.
Okay. Japan's so-called progress, I mean, they're the first out of the, so to speak. Could it give Trump a political win in that sense, sort of that deal he can, showcase to the rest of the world while this China situation drags on?
Exactly. I mean, Japan is the first to probably get the deal done, and Japan comes from a position of strength because it's a key ally as well as a top investor. So it's coming from a position of strength, and it also wants to subtly remind Washington that Japan's economy matters. Why? Because it's also one of the biggest holders of U.S. treasuries. Now, that's not a threat to the U.S., but just to say that Japan's economy is important to the U.S. and that there should be given certain concessions because of that. So that's one thing that the Finance Minister Carter will be mentioning, that it holds a lot of treasury. So again, it's subtle diplomatic messaging between Japan and the U.S. as opposed to the hardline stance taken between China and the U.S. at this point in time. And I also have to say that, based on the deals that the U.S. makes with Japan and with South Korea, Beijing can take a wait-and-see attitude because it wants to see what the baseline case is, how these deals are done, what concessions the U.S. is willing to make, and then recalibrate its own demands.
Absolutely, but keep the channels open. All right, thanks, Roland, and see you again in a little while. All right, we have a lot more coming up on East Asia tonight. Investors cheering on potential ease of trade tensions after China says it's evaluating trade talks with the U.S. And tariff threats push China's Temu to tweak its business model. Welcome back as we get more business news from Roland Lim. And Roland, we can't get too far from tariffs, and now they are pushing companies to really change their business strategies.
Right, you are, Jill. Now, from Chinese retail giant Temu to American behemoth Amazon, firms are resorting to finding local U.S. supplies or building inventories. I'll have details on that in a while, but first let's look at the market reaction. Equity markets in East Asia largely rose as China said it was considering a U.S. offer to negotiate steep tariffs, raising hopes that a trade war between the world's two biggest economies might ease. Optimism around progress on tariff talks and a weaker yen pushed the Nikkei 225 higher, setting the index to mark its longest rally in nearly 2 years. The yen sank after the Bank of Japan lowered growth forecasts due to U.S. tariffs and left interest rates on hold. South Korea's stock market was little change ahead of the 4-day holiday. The Korean won, however, jumped to its highest in 5 months. Taiwan's currency and stocks surged. Its benchmark stock index jumped 2.7% to outperform the region's equity gauges, while the Taiwan dollar posted its biggest gain in nearly 4 decades. Hong Kong stocks climbed to a nearly 1-month high as signs of easing trade tensions comforted investors, while EV makers rallied on strong sales. The mainland markets closed till next Tuesday for the Golden Week holiday. Factory activity in manufacturing hubs, South Korea and Taiwan contracted last month as President Trump's tariff policies upended global trade. The uncertainty has led to declines in new orders and cutbacks in production. The purchasing managers' indices for Taiwan, shown here by the gray line, dropped to its lowest level in 16 months, while South Korea's factory activity, that's the red line, contracted at the steepest pace in more than 2.5 years. Both PMI readings staying below the 50 waterline that separates expansion from contraction. New business fell for the first time in over a year, leading to lower output and purchasing. Now, most companies are citing weaker demand domestically and in key export markets in Asia and Europe, with some attributing it to Trump's tariff hikes. S&P's economist says Taiwanese firms generally anticipate production to decline over the next 12 months. Meantime, South Korean companies are trimming headcounts as outlook for the coming year has turned negative. A Chinese e-commerce platform, Temu, is tweaking its business model to avoid tariffs and keep prices unchanged in its U.S. market. Earlier this week, the platform removed all products shipped from China from its U.S. site. Now, it's part of an effort to avoid Trump tariffs following the end of the de minimis loophole today. The loophole, which exempted small parcels from import duties, allowed e-commerce giants such as Temu and Shein to expand rapidly. Now, Temu says it will now shift to what it calls a local fulfillment model and is in the process of actively recruiting U.S. merchants selling to a domestic market. The pivot is the latest development in a number of whirlwind changes over the past week made by Temu, which has caused confusion for its users in the U.S. The platform first announced that products shipped from China will have their prices raised, then shortly after displayed a separate import charge. That's a move that was adopted by other retailers and has drawn sharp criticism from U.S. President Trump, which brings us to the present development of a local fulfillment center. Apple has trimmed its share buyback program by $10 billion, with CEO Tim Cook telling analysts that tariffs could add about $900 million in costs this quarter. That's as the iPhone maker shifts its vast supply chain to minimize the impact of President Trump's trade war. Apple has announced $500 billion in spending to expand its U.S. footprint. Mr. Cook says that also jacks up expenses as it builds out servers and chip factories with its manufacturing partners. In addition, he outlined how Apple has started to build up a stockpile of products so that the majority of its devices sold in the U.S. this quarter will not come from China. The firm's China-centric production makes it especially vulnerable to levies. It also struggled to hold on to sales there, which is one of the biggest smartphone markets outside the U.S. Apple also announced that its supply chain is already starting to shift. Mr. Cook says he expects the majority of iPhones sold in the U.S. to be made in India, adding that its products are exempt from President Trump's most severe reciprocal tariffs for now. Now, the assurance, however, has not been able to allay investor concerns. Apple shares dropping around 3% in pre-market trade. Analysts say the CEO's comments show that the company is not as certain about its near-term future. Amazon is also trying to temper investor concerns about the impact of Trump's administrative tariffs on its e-commerce business. Now, during the tech giant's first quarter earnings call, CEO Andy Jassy said that the firm is not uniquely susceptible to tariffs because of its structure, especially with regards to China, and added that some customers are stocking up in advance of widespread tariffs. But analysts say as shoppers step up purchases to avoid tariff impacts, the company and its sellers may struggle to avoid price increases in the coming months as they blow through inventory and place new orders. Amazon's tariff troubles extend to more than just the big duties. The end of the de minimis rule is expected to have a big impact on some of the company's third-party sellers and its whole business, which ships much of its merchandise from China. The pullback is already starting to show. Now, some sellers have planned to sit out major sales events such as Amazon Prime Day in July. A third-party seller services accounts for nearly a quarter of the company's revenues. Ports on the west coast of the U.S. are bracing for a major impact as the U.S. and China trade war continues. Now, with goods from China expected to decrease, port leaders warn that a sharp drop in shipping traffic will threaten jobs, raise prices, and hit the broader U.S. economy. Ira Spitzer reports from Oakland.
The sprawling port of Oakland is the first U.S. stop for tens of millions of products arriving from China each year, as well as the last stop for agricultural products from California headed the other direction. But industry analysts like Sean Randolph of the Bay Area Council Economic Institute believe the recent tariffs of well over 100% on those goods mean a slowdown at this port is almost certain.
They've estimated that cargo volume will drop by about 10% with the current level of tariffs. That's a lot for any port, and it has ripples going through the economy.
Those ripples are apparent at the East Bay Restaurant Supply Warehouse just down the road from the port. The business sells kitchen products to restaurants and consumers, many made in China. Its chief financial officer, David Wong, says prices started going up as soon as the Trump administration made it clear that tariffs were going to happen.
Since early of the part of this year, we've been receiving communications from our partners, from our vendors about the increase in prices. When they pass down the prices to us, unfortunately, in this industry, we will pass on to the end consumers.
Data shows fewer ships leaving China for West Coast ports, and the longer it goes on, the more volatile things are likely to get. However, there is some hope following President Trump's comments that the tariffs could come down substantially. In a statement to CNA, the Port of Oakland said it is closely monitoring the evolving tariff situation, which remains uncertain, especially regarding global countermeasures, deals, and retaliation. The Trump administration has indicated one of its major goals with the tariffs is to try and encourage domestic manufacturing. That strategy is based on the idea of reshoring. Instead of using factories abroad, companies would build their products in the U.S., making ports like this one a lot less busy. That creates a dilemma for U.S. companies who had already been trying to reduce their reliance on China by moving manufacturing to countries more closely aligned with Washington.
So what does that say to a company that may have moved its production out of China to Vietnam or to Mexico, thinking they were doing the right thing, they were diversifying, they were doing what the U.S. government was asking, and now is that still a viable strategy?
California, which is home to the U.S.'s largest economy, recently became the first state to sue the Trump administration over the tariffs. Governor Gavin Newsom said they've already inflicted billions in damages and caused irreparable harm. With its proximity to Asia, global trade disruptions have the potential to leave the state high and dry. Ira Spitzer, CNA, Oakland, California.
And you're up to date with the business news.
All right, thanks for that, Roland. Well, coming up on East Asia tonight, South Korean troops stage live-fire drills near the inter-Korean border to maintain readiness against what they say are drone threats from the north. And we look beyond East Asia to examine the potential impact of smaller parties and independent candidates on tomorrow's Australian election. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. China evaluates an offer from the U.S. to talk tariffs and a possible easing of trade tensions. Talks with Japan and South Korea also showing positive signs. But the trade war spelling bad news for factories in East Asia. Manufacturing output slumping in Taiwan and South Korea as orders shrink amid global economic uncertainty. South Korea's third acting president in 5 months, Education Minister Lee Ju-ho, stepping in to fill a temporary vacuum in leadership as he faces the challenge of steering a country in political and economic turmoil. Amid that uncertainty, South Korea's army says its troops conducted live-fire drills near the inter-Korean border this week. It's part of efforts to maintain readiness against what they call drone threats from the north. The 3-day air defense exercise, which started on Wednesday, took place in the border county of Gyeongsang, located 160 kilometers northeast of the capital, Seoul. Around 130 soldiers were involved with the use of 8 anti-aircraft vehicles, including the K-30 Biho and the K-30 Chunho. Troops have been told to detect and intercept aerial targets simulating North Korean drones. Seoul has moved to bolster its counter-drone capabilities in recent years, and that's after it failed to intercept 5 North Korean drones crossing the border in late 2022, including one that entered the capital's airspace. A political shake-up in the United States. President Donald Trump has ousted his national security advisor, Mike Waltz, who is known for his hawkish views on China. Secretary of State Marco Rubio takes on the role until a replacement is found, making him the first since Henry Kissinger in the 1970s to hold both positions simultaneously. President Trump posted on his Truth Social platform, nominating Mr. Waltz to be America's next ambassador to the United Nations, a position which requires Senate confirmation. Mr. Waltz posted on X saying he was deeply honored to continue serving the president and the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance later clarified to Fox News that Mr. Waltz's removal from his national security role was not a firing, as what some media outlets made of it, but quite the contrary, and justified that it's actually a promotion. A Nikkei Asia report, quoting a U.S. foreign policy think tank analyst, said the move could be a signal by Trump to remodel a foreign policy approach to one that allows for greater progress, such as in deals that the U.S. leader wants to make. Taiwanese President William Lai is reportedly set to host foreign diplomats and other dignitaries to mark the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II at the capital, Taipei, next week. It would be the first time that Taiwan is formally commemorating the victory. Reuters, citing sources, says that the event is expected to be held at the Taipei Guest House and that Mr. Lai is expected to call on allies of the self-ruled island to unite in the face of what they call growing aggression from China, Russia, Iran and North Korea. Taipei in recent months has sought to cast the World War as a lesson to Beijing as to how aggression would end in failure. Beijing has long considered Mr. Lai a separatist, and tensions have intensified since he became president. Mr. Lai has vowed to uphold Taiwan's rights to independence. As mainland China maintains, the island is part of its territory. The Chinese Foreign Ministry, when asked about Taiwan's interpretation of the war and the upcoming anniversary, responded to Reuters saying the move signals, quote, a distortion of history, tampering with facts and spreading of lies and fallacies. Beijing adds that such tactics had long been a ploy of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, led by Mr. Lai. Well, let's turn to Australia. It heads to the polls tomorrow with opinion polls suggesting a victory for the Labor Party. And that may depend on smaller parties and independent candidates supporting a minority government. History shows it's never too late for parties to come from behind to snatch a surprise victory. Roger Maynard reports from the marginal Sydney seat of Parramatta.
Set in the heart of Sydney, Parramatta is nearly 30 kilometres from the CBD. It's also one of the most culturally and politically diverse seats in the country.
We're kind of in the middle of Sydney here. You know, any way you divide Sydney in half, Parramatta's usually on the border. You've got the kind of more affluent eastern side and the more working class side to the west. You've got the more multicultural side. The Parramatta's on the kind of almost but not quite on the North Shore. So there's a lot of ways in which Parramatta is that dividing line of Sydney, and in one sense that also applies to elections, that you know, you've got Liberal voting suburbs to the north and Labor voting suburbs to the south, and Parramatta is where they meet.
And that's reflected in the range of candidates. There are no fewer than 8 people putting their hands up for election, from Labour's Andrew Charlton, the sitting member, to Ganesh Lok, an entrepreneur of Indian heritage who's standing for the so-called Trumpet of Patriots.
Australia needs to change. Like, there has been so many issues, like the cost of living going up. You know, there's issues with the first-home buyers. They cannot buy home. House affordability has gone up. There are no jobs for younger Australians. So we want to change that.
Liberal candidate Katie Mullins, who's worked in the area for the past 17 years, is a lawyer who knows that many Australians here are struggling financially.
Well, we need to rein in the wasteful inflationary spending, and we also have some great cost of living relief that we're offering. You will see in the truck behind me advertising one of our big policies. We're going to halve the fuel tax, so it will be 25 cents a litre off your petrol as soon as we get into government. That's immediate cost of living relief that will make a real difference in Western Sydney, where a lot of people drive.
Among the changes the Liberals want is a broader energy base with a mix of renewable, gas and, more controversially, nuclear power. But nuclear energy is anathema to Labor.
The case for nuclear power, if you look at it from a business end, is not very strong, and if you look at it from a public support end, does not appear to be very strong either. So this is quite a bold policy from the opposition to suddenly announce that it is proposing to build up to 7 nuclear reactors around the country, and to do so on the public purse. That is, to build them using government money and to operate them using government money. A strange and quite courageous decision by the opposition, which positions itself as a party of small government and free enterprise.
More immediately, it's the Greens who might provide the key to this election.
The best case scenario from my perspective would be a hung parliament with the Greens in the balance of power, so we can push Labor to do better.
Smaller parties and independents are increasingly making their presence felt, both nationally and locally, and they could have the final say. Although past Australian elections suggest nothing can be taken for granted.
I would say, though, we had a big polling error in 2019, and that could happen again. And if the polls do prove to be incorrect, then, we could see a coalition victory. They're not that far behind.
With pre-polling available for more than a week now, it's just possible this election has already been decided. But with so many independent candidates, it's really hard to predict the outcome with confidence. Roger Maynard, CNA at Parramatta in Sydney's geographic heartland.
The hustings over, and the spotlight now falls on voters across Singapore as they too head to the polls tomorrow. More than 2.7 million people are eligible to cast their ballot as they step forward to choose the voices that will shape the 15th Parliament and with it the future of the nation. To walk us through the vital role each voter plays, here's Aslam Shah.
The rallies are done. The speeches are over. The campaigns have ended. Now it's your turn. One vote, one future, one chance to make your voice heard. Singapore comes together. Across the island, more than 2.75 million voters are heading to the polls. Across 1,300 polling stations, thousands of officials stand ready to make sure your voting experience is smooth, secure, and seamless. More than 36,000 trained election officers have prepared for this moment, all to serve you. It's democracy in action, and you are at the heart of it. Now, before you leave the house, remember you only need two things. First, your polling card. That can be the physical one or your e-poll card on the SingPass app. Second, your original ID. Bring your NRIC or your passport. No photocopies, please. Polling stations are open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And here's a tip. You don't have to rush first thing in the morning.
Maybe not necessary to come like first thing in the morning. It's possible to come like throughout the day. Maybe you can pace yourself because morning usually people are excited. So they'll come and then there'll be a huge crowd. Maybe I could suggest they could come after lunchtime or in the early afternoon, 5 p.m. So that the crowd is evenly spread.
So take your time to cast your vote. Your vote will still count whenever you arrive within polling hours. When you reach your polling station, an election officer will verify your location and check your ID. Need assistance? No worries. Help is available for those who need it. Inside the station, just remember, no photography, no smoking, no eating, and keep your phones away. Now here's how you cast your vote. Step 1, verify your identity. Physical or digital ID works fine. Step 2, receive your ballot paper. Step 3, head to the booth and make your choice. You'll also notice something new. The marking space on the ballot paper is larger this time. And you have options. Use the X stamp provided, fast and easy, or bring your own pen to draw your X.
So for this round of elections, we have enlarged the marking space on your ballot paper. So we encourage everybody, all the voters, to use the X stamp. And it's very convenient, it's very easy to do so. Now, if you so wish to bring your own pen and mark your own cross on the ballot paper, that's also fine.
But here's the big rule. Only your X belongs on the ballot paper. No signatures, no extra notes, no doodles, anything else could void your vote. When you're done, fold your ballot paper neatly and drop it into the ballot box. And leave the station promptly. And just like that, your part is done. One moment, one choice. Voting isn't just a right, it's a duty. Your vote is secret, and it shapes Singapore's tomorrow. Vote with pride, vote on time, and vote wisely. Because your voice matters, and your future depends on it.
Well, staying in the region, Bernama reports that Malaysia is conducting a joint military exercise in the southern state of Johor. Drills are taking place around Pengerang, Tanjung Pengalay and Desaru. They involve the 21st Special Forces Group as well as the Johor Military Force. The exercise reportedly includes tactical vehicle movements, helicopter flights and explosive elements. The drills will end on the 13th of May. Now, Malaysian authorities say it's all part of efforts to ensure readiness in facing possible terrorist threats to the country's national security. Coming up on East Asia tonight, South Korea and Singapore celebrate 50 years of diplomatic ties this year with a flurry of activities from arts and culture to food and entertainment. Singapore and South Korea mark 50 years of diplomatic ties this year. Activities are being lined up to bring a slice of Singapore to Seoul as both sides aim to upgrade relations and strengthen bonds between their people. CNA's Im Young-suk has more.
Joe Lim from Singapore started a restaurant in Seoul about 5 years ago, naming it 1 Degree North, after the location of his home country. At lunchtime, the place fills up quickly, with South Koreans hungry for a taste of Singapore's hawker food like chicken rice.
일단 그 라이스를 먹는데 고기 풍미도 좀 맛있고 라이스도 그냥 일반 흰쌀밥이 아니어가지고 한국에서는 흰쌀밥을 주로 먹으니까 좀 특별한 날에 이렇게 좀 먹고 싶을 때가 있어서 회사 동료들이랑 종종 오고.
Mr. Lim moved to Seoul in 2019 after marrying a South Korean woman. He says business was tough in the early days, when it had to operate as a delivery-only business during the COVID-19 pandemic. But he takes pride in having introduced Singaporean cuisine to South Koreans.
Especially during COVID when we started, I felt like we kind of bridged the gap and allowed Koreans to have a little mini vacation coming here to try the food.
And food is important to both countries, even featuring in greetings, as Singapore's ambassador to South Korea, Eric Teo, pointed out at a recent food festival in Seoul.
Do you know what is the most common greetings in Singapore when friends and colleagues meet each other? Have you eaten? What shall we have? After almost 6 years in Korea, I realized this is also a common greeting in Korea. Koreans and Singaporeans share a love for food, with cuisine woven into the fabric of our daily life.
Current and former lawmakers and ambassadors came to sample 50 Singaporean dishes served up to mark a significant milestone, the 50th anniversary of bilateral relations. South Koreans were also treated in April to a performance by Singapore group THE Dance Company in Seoul. The event was put together to deepen cultural understanding between the two countries, which established diplomatic ties in August 1975. At the opening, Ambassador Teo said Singapore and South Korea went through a similar path without any natural resources, relying on the only resource they had, their people, to achieve success.
We not only rank among each other's top 10 trading and investment partners, we also collaborate closely in new and emerging areas such as the digital economy, artificial intelligence and startups, energy, sustainability, and many other areas. We are looking forward to upgrade our relations to a strategic partnership this year during the 50th anniversary.
South Korea's National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik also praised the close bilateral ties, saying he plans to travel to Singapore this year, returning a visit to Seoul by his Singaporean counterpart in February.
고위급 교류가 굉장히 중요하거든요. 그런 점에서 보면 국회의장님 오셨기 때문에 제가 가고 또 APEC에 정상에 참여하시고 이렇게 하면서 양국의 한 가지 면에 있어서 발전하는 게 아니라 아주 다양한 발전을 해 나가야 되니까.
Former South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Myung-hwan says he believes ties will further strengthen.
Singapore is a gateway for Korean government as well as the Korean business circle to Southeast East Asian countries, ASEAN. It's very important for Korea. So I think it's inevitable that Korea and Singapore has to cooperate each other to strengthen, our participation in the Southeast Asian countries.
The two countries are looking to upgrade their free trade agreement and also widen cooperation in areas like education, defense, and cybersecurity, as Singapore and South Korea celebrate 50 years of cooperation. Lim Yan-suk, CNA, Seoul.
If you're a fan of K-pop, you're probably used to seeing highly polished performances from a diverse range of boy and girl groups. But one such group is banking on technology to showcase their talent and even transform how they look.
With their catchy tunes, slick dance moves, and full-capacity concerts, boy band Plave might look like any other rising K-pop idols. Except the stars are two-dimensional avatars being controlled by real people.
Hello, this is Plave!
Plave recently became the first virtual idols to enter the Billboard 200 global chart, and they've racked up over 470 million views on YouTube. They spoke to Reuters in a virtual interview after they had performed to thousands of screaming fans in Seoul.
2년 동안 좀 이렇게 꽉꽉 채워서 팬분들과 우리 플리 여러분들과 소통했다는 점이 저는 지금 저희의 관계를 단단하게 만들어줬다라는 생각을 하고요. 또 앞으로도 더 멋진 음악과 또 춤을 만들어서 우리 테라 전 세계에 계신 우리 플리 여러분들께 사랑을 보답하고 싶습니다.
Unlike other virtual pop groups, the group's labels said there are real people behind each character, using motion capture technology to relay their movements. For live performances, the band uses the tech in their studio to stream to the venue, allowing them to react to their fans in real time.
其实我觉得他们本质上没有太大差别，以一个粉丝来说，就是他们给我们的爱啊，还有就是让我们想要前进的动力啊，每天早上起来第一件事情就是想看他们，这件事情是一样的。
Virtual acts aren't new to the music scene. Think British virtual band Gorillaz or Japan's so-called Vocaloid Hatsune Miku. However, Plave's success hinges on their interaction with fans.
쌍방향적 소셜미디어 플랫폼을 통해서 꾸준하게 소통할 수 있다는 것을 의미를 하거든요. 그렇게 되면 사실 아이돌 그룹을 좋아하는 데 있어서 사실 최근에는 아이돌 그룹의 콘서트에 가는 것도 비용이 굉장히 많이 들고, 그리고 그들과 소통하는 것도 뭐 유료 메신저 앱을 사용해야 되고, 이런 상황에서 사이버 가수가 가지고 있는 그런 접근성이 훨씬 더 용이하다.
As for Plave, band member Eunho has big dreams.
Justin Bieber, if you see this, this broadcast, if you see this, I sang one of your songs called Red Eye on our broadcast. So please check it out and contact. Please call us, Plave. We're waiting for you.
Right. Now, previously on East Asia Tonight, we spoke with our Japan correspondent on how abandoned properties are popping up across the country, partly a result of urbanization and an aging demographic. Schools are not spared either. Thousands have shuttered over the past 20 years due to a lack of students. But an event planning firm has seized on the opportunity, repurposing one such abandoned school in a small city to give visitors a unique experience. Tourists get to see what it's like to be in a typical Japanese high school. They get to don a uniform, practice writing in kanji, a system of Japanese writing adapted from Chinese characters, go for gym classes and participate in sports day group competitions, and even practice earthquake drills and cleaning the classroom at the end of the day. The full-day experience costs $245, but that's a price those looking to immerse in Japanese culture are willing to pay.
The uniforms really helps with the whole immersion experience. The teacher is really in character, and just being able to do it with my friends makes the whole experience super fun.
Based on
the things I've seen in like anime, in shows, things I've read, it felt pretty authentic. It got compressed into one day, which is kind of what you have to do. But I would say, yeah, I feel like I was in the shoes of a high school student again in a different country.
It seems to have its fans. The operator is hoping the concept will gain traction as a way to repurpose abandoned schools. It's a move which also aligns with government plans to draw more visitors out of popular destinations such as Tokyo and Kyoto that suffer from over-tourism.
ここがもし人気になって廃校利活用の一つの事例だったり、あと地域の活性化の新しい方法として注目されるようなことがあれば、ぜひ他の場所でも展開してみたいというふうには思います。
This has been East Asia Tonight this Friday. Don't forget headlines anytime at cna.asia, also Facebook and YouTube. Bye for now.